Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of The Smallest Thing. I'm Lisa Manterfield. This week, restrictions are being lifted in our county, but I'm moving with caution. Frankly, the research I did while writing The Smallest Thing was eye-opening. A number of people have commented on how prescient the book was, but I didn't have a crystal ball. I didn't imagine an impossible scenario that just happened to come true. Everything I found in my research suggested that COVID would happen. The next world health crisis, said the authors of one virology study I read, will be a global pandemic. I'll tell you more about my research after this week's episode. But first, Em gets a virology lesson of her own. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of The Smallest Thing. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Smallest Thing, written by Lisa Manterfield, read for you by Charlie Sanderson.
Chapter 12. From the rock at the top of Cooklet Delph, the Eames skyline is silhouetted against the floodlights from base camp. I pick out my house, and I am once again faced with creeping back into a place I've just escaped. Last time, the biggest threat was the wrath of Dad. This time, I'm going back to my indescribable hell. I slump down into the grass and let Rose's betrayal engulf me, my anger ballooning up inside me. I thought I could count on him. I thought that if anyone would rebel against my forced imprisonment, against unreasonable rules laid down by the institution, it would be Ro. He was always the one daring me to break free, to be my own person, to not let myself be confined. What happened to my daredevil? As soon as I get home, I will demand an answer. But as I replay the confrontation with Will, snippets of understanding cluster together, pointing the finger of blame at me. I am as guilty as my father for prejudice against the Tories. Only I relished Rose's bad boy image, gravitated to the partner least likely to please my dad. But Ro has never been a daredevil. Even before I told him of my plans to move to London, I worried he might back out. Even as I packed boxes and resigned from my job, a little piece of me knew he might lose his nerve. To trust him to risk his life to save mine was the logic of an idiot. I have no one to blame but myself. But that still doesn't stop me from despising Ro. From this vantage point, I can see the whole village, nestled peacefully in its hollow. Beyond is the dark shape of two bands of hills stretching into the distance. Behind the first is the village of Grindleford, with its cosy train station, and over the second is the city of Sheffield, at least 20 miles from here in the neighbouring county. Beyond, far beyond, lies London, the place that once held my dreams. In the daylight, I'd be able to see a network of roads and paths and borders of dry stone walls separating fields and farms. There are physical boundaries between here and there, but none that I couldn't cross or go around. And yet I cannot get there. I am trapped in this village by powerful forces, by an illness that has baffled the so-called experts, by government bureaucracy that considers me a threat, and by people too afraid to remember their friends. I have never felt so alone in my life. I should have been in London tonight, unpacking boxes, starting my new life. Of all the obstacles I'd predicted might stand in my way, I had never imagined this. It seems I have no choice now but to go home and wait. Wait to see what happens next, and wait to find out if I will die here. But that feels a lot like giving up, and giving up is unacceptable. Will may have got the better of me this time, but he can't guard every inch of the quarantine perimeter every hour of every day. There has to be some way out of here, and I am determined to find it. I push up from the rock, taking one last look at the view beyond my prison walls, and march back down to the village, my wet feet squelching inside my boots. My mind churns with possibility, testing the fence like a caged animal, looking for a weakness the authorities might have overlooked. Vans full of supplies come and go all day long. Maybe I could hitch a ride out. What if I could get my hands on a hazmat suit and just walk out? That could work too. I'm just thinking about sewers and wondering if I have the guts to venture out that way when Aidan appears, startling me. It's like a magic trick or some kind of sixth sense that lets him know I'm here. I hold my ground, almost daring him to ask where I've been. Do your worst, turn me in, I think. You're out late, he says. So are you. I'm on the night shift. Of course you are, I think, without meeting his gaze. I needed a walk. He glances at my boots. Can you tell they're wet? With the amount of stuff you've got with you, you look like you'd be gone for days. I was worried you were going to make a run for it. I force a laugh, even though I know that, now Aidan has seen me, I will not escape from here. The trickiest barrier between me and my freedom is standing right in front of me. Your hair suits you that colour, he says, holding his gaze on me just long enough to confirm he's on to me. Come with me. He turns down the street and gestures for me to follow. I know I'm in trouble. He wasn't joking about me making a run for it, and, despite all this talk about his role here, now he's going to turn me in. What is it with these men who get their thrills from landing me in hot water? Where are we going? I ask. I want to show you something. Show me what? He turns around and peers through his visor at me. Are you always this stubborn? He asks. Yes, I say. Only I prefer to call it determined. His eyes smile, and I'm sure I glimpse a look of admiration. The cartoon face on the front of his suit smiles up at me too, friendly and trustworthy. Even though my gut instincts have been unreliable lately, I sense that this isn't a man on a vindictive mission. Trusting my gut, I walk with him through the village. When we reach one of the trailers near the village green, he opens the door and calls out a quick hello. When no one answers, he reaches inside the door, hands me a clean mask, gloves and a long paper coat and tells me to put them on. What's going on? I ask as he ushers me inside and locks the door behind us. I try to sound more sure of myself than I feel. Even though he's not giving off any creepy vibes, I keep my distance from him. Thanks to Ro, I'm no longer willing to trust anyone, and I can't assume that anything I do outside of my house will be safe or private. You can't do a runner, Emmett, Aidan says at last. I start to object, but he stops me. I know you were thinking about it. I can see it in your face, he says. And your hair. I pull the edge of my bottom lip between my teeth, pressing the soft flesh and trying to decide on a tactic. The weight of my backpack roots me to the floor like a ball and chain. It's pointless to deny it because it's clear he knows, but I'm not about to confess my guilt either. I can't blame you, he says. I know what it must be like for you here, but I'm urging you not to try it. Honestly, I say, looking him dead in the eye now, you have absolutely no idea what it's like. You have your nice protective suit, and you get to leave any time you want. You don't have the first clue what it's like to be trapped here, not knowing if you're going to live or die. Actually, I sort of do, he says, inching his words out. I've been on the other side, where you are. As this is the first I've heard of an entire village being quarantined, I find that extremely unlikely. Where? I ask. Rwanda. His eyes seem to darken, as if the sun has gone in. I worked with a relief team there. We had a protocol breach and almost half the team was compromised. They put us in isolation for 3 weeks, a giant tent away from the main camp. 12 of us watching one another to see who would start showing symptoms first. And did you? No, but I had to watch the others who did. For a moment his eyes lose their focus, and I can tell he's thinking about his friends. The cheeky glint is replaced by a deep sadness. I avert my gaze, not wanting to pry into his most intimate memories or to let him see the unexpected kinship I suddenly feel. "There was nothing I could do to help them," he says at last. "It's the most helpless and frustrating feeling I've ever had." Yeah, I think. That just about sums it up. I'm uncomfortable with this personal admission. Aidan is supposed to be the enemy, and I prefer my enemies cold and unfeeling, more like Will. But Aidan gets it. He understands what it's like to be here. For a moment, my anger at Roe and his cowardice is softened by this tiny nugget of compassion. A friendly smile flickers into Aidan's eyes again, and I find myself smiling back, grateful for his kindness. But there's something else causing my discomfort, some awful, niggling feeling wriggling in the pit of my stomach. "The people you work with, what did they have?" I ask. Images of news reports flash into my mind, hundreds of people dying of a terrible disease. Ebola. I can barely think the name, and I can't bring myself to say it out loud now. "Is that what we have?" Aidan shakes his head, but not with sufficient conviction to assure me. He leans over one of the computer consoles set up in the trailer. It has a modified mouse and oversized keyboard so that he can operate it without removing his gloves. He taps a few keys and pulls up a map of the British Isles. "There's been a development," he says. "A development?" I drop my backpack to the floor, shoving it under the desk with my foot. "The official word will go out tonight, but don't tell anyone I told you first. Turns out this flu is a bit more unusual than that." "That's not going to come as news to anyone around here," I say. "I'm sure, but up until now, they've had absolutely no clue what it is, and you can't treat what you can't diagnose. But now it's starting to look like a familiar virus." "What kind of virus?" I ask, although I'm not sure I want to hear his answer. "That's what they still don't know. Viruses come in families. Ebola and Marburg are filoviruses, nasty things they are. Measles and mumps are in another family, and your common or garden variety flu is in a different family again." "So what family is our virus in?" That's the question. The symptoms we're seeing are typical of a lot of viruses. Fever, headache, body pain, nausea. The kind of thing you'd expect from the flu. But they're saying the pathology looks a lot like something they've seen in Siberia. There've been a couple of small outbreaks in nomadic tribes there. They've managed to contain them, and that's the only place it's been seen, so it's never become a major epidemic. "How did it get here?" Aidan shrugs. That's part of what they'll be trying to find out. I rack my brains, sifting through the health classes I daydreamed through, trying to ferret out any information I have about viruses. All I can come up with is that they're really, really small and very infectious. I also know that, as with a cold, someone can become infected and pass their virus along to others before they even know they're sick. Dr. Spencer could have been harbouring our Siberian visitor long before he felt ill. He could have already had it when he peered into my ears and down my throat. The only indication that this is nothing more than a fear-fueled hypothesis is that, so far, I'm still here to worry about it. Now they know what it is, can they cure it? Let's just say that research funds have been a little thin, but now it's here, things will move a bit faster, I'm guessing. I wonder how many people had to die before we became a priority. But I keep my mouth shut in the hope Aidan will keep talking and divulge information I can use, such as how to stay alive. "So here's what I want to show you," he says, turning back to the map. "The thing is, this isn't public knowledge, and I could probably get in a lot of bother for this, but I wanted you to see it." "Okay." I feel a spark of excitement at his trust. "But why me?" He glances over his shoulder and appraises me as if he's thinking about this question for the first time. Because one way or another, I'd like it if you stuck around. Before I can ask what he means and if he's actually flirting with me, he clicks on the map, causing big splotches of green to appear. They're patchy in some places and dense and dark in others. I can identify the dark patches as major population centres: London, Birmingham, Sheffield, Leeds and Glasgow over the border. He clicks on a spot in the middle of the country, probably pretty close to Eyam, and a single red dot appears. This is all hypothetical, a computer model based on the limited data they've managed to collect. But let's say this red dot is one person. Could be anyone. Let's say he or she is carrying the virus but doesn't know it, doesn't have any symptoms or anything. In fact, he or she may never show any symptoms. And let's say he or she finds himself or herself outside the quarantine zone. Okay, I get it. It's me you're talking about. Purely hypothetical, like I say, but let's say this person comes into contact with another person and gives them the virus, but neither of them knows it, so they go about their business as usual. He clicks the mouse again. Now watch what happens. At first, nothing seems to happen, except in a box at the side of the map labelled days, where the number changes from 1 to 2 to 3, and so on. At about 10 days, the red me dot changes and starts to grow. I have to really stare at it because the change is so gradual I'm not even sure it's happening. Then, just as the growing dot morphs into a splotch, another red dot springs up close by and then another around the London patch of green. In between the me dot and the London dot, other dots appear along an invisible line, each following the same pattern as the original. Each grows slowly, then suddenly blossoms as new dots appear. Something else catches my eye on the panel near the numbers. A graph starts to form. A red line rising up from the axis, like a charmed snake. As it lifts, the London dot bursts open like a rosebush blooming. Then other flowers spring to life around the map until the original green patches have all but been replaced by red. I don't need to ask Aidan what it means. I know how quickly a cold could spread around school. One person gets it, then another, and before you know it, everyone's sniffing and hacking. But even that first-hand knowledge can't compare to the visual image in front of me. I only have to think about how many people I come into contact with on a normal day to see how this would spread. My one dot could easily become 10 or more in a single day. Each of those 10 dots could become 100, then 1,000, and so on. And in the space of the week, 2/3 of our country's population would be infected. Put even a handful of those people on trains or planes, and the consequences are unimaginable. As the red line on the graph climbs higher, the weight of the country bears down on me. This isn't just data. These are real people with lives and dreams like me. I imagine if the 4 people who prevented my escape had helped me instead. 4 potential new red dots. And row, another. Then the people on the trains and buses I planned to take, and anyone else who gave me a hand along the way. In return, I might have given them a death sentence. I might have taken our virus all the way to Auntie Margie's, all the way to Mum and Alice. My escape and infection of the whole population would have made me infamous. Typhoid Mary meets Siberian Emmett. Aidan watches me watch the map, but he doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. We both know what might have been, and what now is instead. Will may have prevented me from unknowingly spreading the virus, but he's also kept me here, in the heart of the first red bloom. I turn back to the map to see what happens next. As the day's counter hits 28, something unexpected happens. The red graph plateaus, and within a couple more days turns downward again. The map changes too. The red dots begin to disappear and patches of green spring up again, smaller than before but definitely there. By 60 days, the red dots have all gone. What's left is a similar pattern of green as before, just lighter and patchier. When I look back at the graph, the line is a perfect hill, rising up, cresting, and disappearing again. Deb would love to see this. "What's this line?" I ask, pointing to the symmetrical curve of the graph. "That's new cases," he says. "It stopped. What happened?" He gives me a half smile, like this is going to be good bad news. "The virus burns itself out. So it's gone." He kind of shrugs. "That's what we think, based on data from the Siberian outbreaks, although we can't be absolutely sure. We think this is the kind of virus you can't usually get twice, like measles or chickenpox. Once you have it, you're immune. After a while, there's no one else for it to infect. That isn't either immune or dead," I add. He nods. 62 days is what they've modelled, based on the virus having access to the mainland population. "And if it only has access to 400 people?" "Same," he says. 62 days, and in theory, it will be over. "In theory," I repeat. "In theory." It's been a little over 2 weeks, that's all, since Dr. Spencer came down with his flu, our first red dot. But if the 2 earlier deaths were related, as some people are now speculating, what's that? 21 days? Maybe 28? Within the week it should reach its peak. All I have to do is hold on for another month after that. It may as well be a lifetime. According to the news, there are 423 people inside the quarantine, I say, more to myself than to Aidan. So according to the numbers, 100 and... I try to use my fingers, but my brain is so muddled and foggy, I can't work it out. 1/3 is 141, says Aidan. 141 of us will not make it out alive. 141 people I know, some of whom I've known my whole life, will cease to exist in the course of 62 days. Every day, at least 2 people I know will die. The last I heard, there've been 36 deaths so far, I say. 37, I believe, as of an hour ago. I don't dare ask who the latest victim is. I just know it's not me, probably not my dad, and hopefully not Deb. All I can think is 104 to go. According to the graph, we're a week away from the downward side of the slope. After that, my odds of becoming one of the 141 will lessen every day. All I have to do is wait it out, I say. Inside his suit, Aidan nods. It's just a slight nod and I can barely see it. I know what he's thinking because I'm having the same thoughts. All I have to do is wait it out and hope that 104 people catch this before I do. The idea of this makes me want to throw up. Aidan. When he turns, I'm not sure what I want to say next. That he's provided a twisted ray of hope in this gloomy place. That in another time and place we might have been friends. That his kindness has touched a part of me that I can't identify. It all sounds stupid. So all I say is, I'm glad you showed me. He holds my gaze for a second and gives me a nod of understanding. Be careful, Emmett, he says. Don't do anything dangerous, okay? Okay. You promise? I nod, because it's what he wants to see, but thanks to this virus, my entire existence is dangerous, and I'm not sure how to avoid that. As we step out of the trailer, I realise I've left Dad's backpack under the desk. I'm just about to turn back when something down the street catches my eye, something familiar. The yellow flash of a suit. 3 suits, to be exact. And my dad. Oh, bugger, I mutter, as the group strides toward us. Everyone's on the bloody night shift tonight. From their decisive movements, it's clear this isn't a friendly visit. I know I've made a big mistake. I think I've got you into that bother after all, I say to Aidan. I was about to say the same to you, he says. It's Reynolds, my boss. Before I can respond, one of the suits takes the lead. Is anything the matter here? She asks. I wait for Aidan to wrap me out, because there's no good reason for either of us to be here otherwise. Just answering a few questions, Dr. Reynolds. To my relief, his voice is matter-of-fact. Reynolds peers at me. And what are you doing out at this hour? Just asking a few questions. I try to sound innocent. I'll handle this. My dad steps to the front, asserting his rights as my father. What the hell are you doing out at this time of night? I've been looking all over for you. Aidan flinches as if he's about to move forward, but I step ahead of him. I got us both into this pickle, so the least I can do is speak for myself. This is my fault, I tell Dr. Reynolds. It usually is, my dad says, just loud enough for me to hear. I couldn't sleep. I got up for a walk. I ran into Aidan and we got talking, that's all. Dad gives me no more than a tiny nod of his head, enough to let me know the best thing I could do for myself would be to keep my mouth shut and follow him home. It takes only an instant to decide I'd be safer abandoning my backpack than exposing my plan to escape. I step toward Dad, turning back only once to catch Aidan's eye in the hopes of sending a telepathic message to make sure it isn't found. I can't read his look, but he seems to be telling me everything will be okay. He's either lying or delusional, but I appreciate his reassurance.
Welcome back. Everything Aidan tells Em in this chapter came out of the research I did for this book. As we've learned with COVID, viral infection rates follow a bell curve, where cases increase slowly at first and then gain momentum, finally reaching a peak and then slowing down at a rate that mirrors the increased side of the curve, just like the graph Aidan shows Em. When we talk about flattening the curve with our lockdown orders, this is the curve we're talking about. The goal of our current lockdown wasn't to hide until the virus is gone, but to flatten the curve so that our healthcare systems can keep on top of cases. The contagion map that Aidan shows Em also came out of my research. I remember finding that simulation online and being stunned to see just how quickly a virus can spread in this age of global movement. The World Health Organization has a similar map that allows you to track the spread of COVID using different variables. Google WHO contagion map and you'll find it. It's fascinating. You can also graph the data using different variables. One that fascinated me shows the number of cases plotted against population. Beginning around January 11th, you can see a large circle representing China and its 1.4 billion population. Around January 21st, new circles pop up at the bottom of the graph, indicating confirmed cases in other countries. Around mid-February, things start to get interesting. The China dot starts to rise, indicating an increase in cases relative to the consistent population. The dots representing Italy and Spain also pop up above the line. Then, around March 24th, the US dot pops up. By the first week of April, it's reached the same level as China. What's shocking, though, is that the US dot continues to rise rapidly and float up above all the other countries. What this graph shows us is that, on a per capita basis, the number of US cases has far exceeded any other country, and it's still rising. As I write this episode, there have been 7.2 million cases worldwide, and while the majority of people recover and many never even realize they have the disease, there have been close to 500,000 confirmed deaths. On the day of writing this, 14 US states and the territory of Puerto Rico recorded their highest 7-day average for numbers of new cases. As lockdown restrictions ease, we need to remember that the virus is not gone, only that our bell curve has been flattened. And while COVID is no longer the top news headline, the pandemic is far from over. M's story also still has many chapters ahead, so tune in next week to find out what all this new information from Aidan will mean to her. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Smallest Thing. To make sure you don't miss next week's episode, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review and share this series with others you think might enjoy it. If you're on Instagram, tag me there at LisaManterfield_, or follow me on Facebook at author Lisa Manterfield and Twitter at Lisa Manterfield. My newsletter subscribers are always the first to know about my news, events, upcoming releases, giveaways, and more. Sign up for monthly delivery at lisamanterfield.com/subscribe and get your complimentary copy of Love, Loss and Letting Go, 3 of my short stories. Thanks to Justin Joseph for producing and editing this show, and to Ketsa.uk for the music. That's all for this episode. Thanks for listening.